My name is Kevin Wolf. I'm a partner in the international trade group of Akin Gump, which is a multinational law firm, but I'm in the DC office. I'm an expert in export controls and related issue. During the Obama administration, I was the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Export Administration.
So our first question to you is about the October 7th announcement. The U.S. Department of Commerce, the Bureau of Industry and Security, issued two rules amending the Export Administration regulations to expand the export control on China-destined advanced node semiconductor and all supercomputer items. Can you explain to us, in the terms of for our viewers and technology entrepreneurs, what this is about and why it may be important to understand for their future business plans? So especially for people in the semiconductor and battery and mineral industries.
So the rule is novel in that it uses a series of controls on items leaving from the United States, over activities of U.S. persons, and over foreign-made, non-U.S. made items if made with any kind of U.S. equipment or technology, in order to stop the indigenous development and production in China of advanced node semiconductors, semiconductor production equipment of any sort, advanced computing applications such as those needed for artificial intelligence applications, and supercomputers. And essentially the policy of the rule is to say that the entire ecosystem of China with these capabilities is an inherent per se national security threat to the United States and its allies. And the reason behind that conclusion is that the advanced compute and the semiconductor production equipment and the advanced node semiconductor items are of particular significance to Chinese plans to develop and produce and modernize its weapons.
The policy and the following enforcement will affect those SMEs, particularly who are trading or exporting dual-use products. So let's say about China, so has become the target in the multilateral export control. So China is the largest trading partner in the digital space. I want to hear your thoughts about a little bit about what a dual-use good is and how do you address this issue while keeping balance between the control and the free trade?
Right. So export controls exist in the US and Korea and other countries to regulate specific commodities, software, and technology, and sometimes services to specific end users, and destinations to accomplish national security and foreign policy objectives. The definition of national security has evolved over the years. During the Cold War, national security with respect to export controls was focused on containing the Soviet Union, limiting its ability to modernize its economy and thus modernize its military, and controls were imposed not only over items that were specific to military applications, but also commercial items that were necessary for the economy to properly function. That is, the types of items that were identified as being of sensitivity for national security reasons are both bespoke, those that are individually modified for military applications or for weapons of mass destruction, as well as commercial items that had some particular significance to the development, production, or use of weapons. And that's the traditional definition of a dual-use item, a commercial item that also has some significance to developing or producing or using weapons or military items. And I include also in that satellite-related items because of their connection to launch capability, as well as intelligence-related applications. What changed, starting about the time near the end when I was in government, is that Chinese technology investment policies and use policies started to incorporate widely available commercial technologies intentionally with a plan to modernize its military. and this is sometimes referred to as the civil-military fusion policy. It's an obligation of those involved in otherwise commercial activities to find ways to benefit the modernization of the Chinese military. In addition, commercial technologies were becoming much more widely used to commit human rights abuses, such as with respect to mass surveillance and issues involving facial recognition, for example, and DNA tracking and monitoring of the Uyghur concentration camps. And that changed in September of this year when the National Security Advisor to the White House, to the President, Jake Sullivan, gave a speech which overtly called, for the first time really since the Cold War, and the use outside the Russia context, for the use of export controls to accomplish strategic objectives and specifically with respect to China. And what he basically said is that there are three broad categories of technologies that are force multiplying technologies, the types of technologies that even if otherwise completely commercial, will be used by the Chinese government to modernize their military and to commit human rights abuses. And the number one topic that he identified in that speech was what he referred to as advanced compute capabilities, advanced node semiconductors, the production equipment necessary to make it, and the computing applications necessary to do the complex and sophisticated design work. And so the October 7th rule is the regulatory implementation that I referred to earlier of that grand strategic policy vision.
We'll continue to see the exponential growth both in terms of technology advancement in device and software for commercial use, as you just said.
Right.
So, so with the U.S. multilateral export controlism, so are there any possibility pathways open for Korean SMEs to diversify supply chain in other countries in the region outside of China? So I just want to hear that, your thoughts about this.
Right, so obviously I'll leave Korean companies to make their own economic decisions. What the rule is not, however, is a broader decoupling agenda. That is, the government, in fact, one of the reasons why the rule is so complicated is that it aggressively does not control investment or develop or trade in mature node semiconductors or less capable electronics. And that is significant because most of the trade in those items now that exist is in the mature node capability, not in the cutting edge advanced node capabilities that are described in the rule. So on one hand, it has an impact on the future, no doubt, because as these technologies become more common, then the opportunities become less. But on the other hand, the very essence of national security is that it does impose economic limitations. That's literally the point of export controls. And so it's really a judgment of governments that the national security imperatives and the collective security of the allies is more important than a particular economic harm with a particular lost sale.
We understand one of the policy reasons involved in EV batteries is critical minerals and components in EV batteries. So foreign headquarters companies making chips in China, like the TSMC and Samsung and SKhainics, so they have been a grace period for 1 year. So these companies have tens of billions of dollars of plants and equipment invested in China, and they are making massive amounts of chips, and that world still is right now. So the law allowed them to keep making semiconductors in China for another year, and I gently ask you for your thoughts on this. So what happened beyond that 1 year? Do you see semiconductor manufacturing facilities being built outside of China, so where it's cheaper to produce that in the US?
But with respect to what happens after this year, no one knows. The point of the 1 year extensions from the October 7th rule for the 4 non-Chinese owned foundries that are in China, and the 2 Korean ones obviously are Samsung and SKhainics, is to give the government a chance, the US government a chance to decide what it wants the long-term policy to be. And it was meant to buy time for the US government to work with the governments of Korea and other allies to make decisions collectively on what that should be, because I'm confident the U.S. government is aware of the Korean government's interests with respect to SKhainics and Samsung in China. I suspect, this is a guess, not information because no decision has been reached, but I suspect the U.S. government will be willing to have a much longer term carve out, a much longer, multi-years, because I realize, and the government realizes, that decisions take many, many years involving foundries. My prediction is that there will be a carve out for the 4 multinationals for multiple years. In order to, so long as the U.S. government is confident that the crown jewels are staying in Korea, for example, and that there isn't assistance to Chinese companies in how to develop or produce advanced node semiconductors.
Today, the Third Tech and Trade Council meeting between the U.S. and EU is ongoing now. And the officials from the parts said that they will cover lots of agendas on the table. So, such as the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, and the EV tax credits on Inflation Reduction Act, and the Russian sanctions like that. So, in terms of national and global security, so which agenda would be the most important for U.S. side?
Well, which of those are the most important for all of them? Control decisions are on the same par with all of the other trade issues that you're referring to. And what's really interesting about these meetings is that historically, export controls were never included in any of the trade meetings that were occurring with allies. Export controls were always treated completely separately as a purely national security issue to be dealt with only through the multilateral regimes or bilateral enforcement actions with respect to national security objectives. And so what I suspect is happening is maybe that the export control, it's probably still happening to some degree, where they're not being traded off against one another.
We expect that you are already aware of the allies' concerns of the EV credit provision on the IRA Act. Do you expect that there will be some correction on IRA Act later, or is there any possibility of providing these incentives to allies, including Korea, the EU, and Japan?
And I don't think any decisions have been made. And I know that the legislation doesn't allow for waivers. And I also know that the Treasury Department hasn't yet published its rules or guidance yet. The President has made general statements about the need for adjustments to occur next year. There might be some room for interpretation within the regulations, and there might be an effort over the course of 2023 to amend the legislation. It's different groups of people within Congress and within the administration trying to achieve different objectives. And from the Korean and from the European and other allied perspectives, the two all seem like they're all part of one U.S. government action and plan. So my one counsel to those following both topics is don't assume that decisions or statements made about one area, the Inflation Reduction Act, are part of a plan that affects the judgments or decisions on the export control side.